So without further ado, it is my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome His Excellency Wamkele Mene, who is the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. Mr. Wamkele Mene comes from an extensive trade and policy background, having represented South Africa in negotiations with the AfCFTA, as well as being on the board chairman of the WTO's Committee on International Trade and Financial Services based out of Geneva. So without further ado, please help me welcome Mr. Wamkele, His Excellency, to the podium for the keynote speech. Thank you. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Mistress of Ceremonies. It's a pleasure to be here with you, honorable ministers, business leaders, and of course, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm very, very happy to have this opportunity to share with you some of our thoughts about how we can challenge protectionism, and of course how we can eliminate barriers to business, doing business in Africa. The topic that you've chosen comes at a time when we are confronting two crises. The first crisis, of course, as you know, is the COVID-19 pandemic, and the second crisis is the geopolitical context between Russia and Ukraine. Both of these crises have had a materially adverse impact on Africa. In the area of supply chains, we have seen significant disruptions in supply chains. We have seen increases in the price of food, causing food insecurity, inflation up to 27% for wheat, barley, and other types of cereals, and as I've just mentioned, causing great disruption to supply chains. The effect of this is protectionism. We are seeing more and more worrying trends of increasing protectionism in the form of export restrictions, in the form of increases in one form of a regulatory barrier or another, and of course we are seeing increases in food prices. The second crisis, which also has a materially adverse impact on Africa and doing business on our continent, is the COVID-19 pandemic. You will recall that in 2020, when the pandemic first hit, the African continent was severely exposed. There was very little capacity for export, or rather for production of much needed tools to fight the pandemic. The African continent in April 2020 received a donation of masks from one individual, from China. This, to me, demonstrates the need for us to accelerate implementation of the AfCFTA to achieve two things. First, enhance our industrial capacity, enhance our self-reliance as a continent, and second, implement the AfCFTA in a way that we will reduce the barriers and eliminate barriers to trade and doing business in Africa. We have the AfCFTA as a very comprehensive trade agreement. It covers trade in goods, trade in services, digital trade, and more importantly, from the point of view of inclusion, it also has a protocol on women and youth in trade. Some of these protocols are still being negotiated. the intellectual property rights, investment protection protocols, they are still under negotiation, and we have a timeline to conclude by December this year. The objective is to boost intra-Africa trade significantly by the year 2035, to double intra-Africa trade, and to encourage better and more effective participation of small medium enterprises in trade in Africa, particularly small medium enterprises that are led by women and young entrepreneurs. And we have seen examples here in Rwanda, for example. We've seen examples of how young people, young entrepreneurs who are at the cutting edge of digital technology innovation and e-commerce to enable, who were able to do this absent a legal framework. Trade agreements can, in a developed context, where it's developing countries, you negotiate the trade agreement and then you move on to the next one. But in our context in Africa, where we have small medium enterprises contributing close to 65% to Africa's combined GDP, employing over 450 million young Africans, it is very, very important that the trade agreement we negotiate is implemented with the tools that are required for us to be able to see the difference that we want to see. I'll mention very briefly some of these tools. First is the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, which we have partnered with Afreximbank to introduce a digital payments tool. If you think about it, today in Africa we have 42 currencies. If you want to trade with somebody you are in Kenya, you want to trade with somebody in Ghana, you have to use a third currency. You have to convert the Kenyan shilling into this third currency. Your counterparty receives the third currency. They then have to convert that third currency to the Ghanaian cedi. All of this costs us close to $5 billion annually. As I've mentioned before, this is what we can quantify. We don't know the cost to Africa's efficiency in business. We don't know the cost of access to trade, and of course, affordability for small medium enterprises and young entrepreneurs who want to trade across our regions on the continent. And so you will now, with this Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, you will be able to trade in your local currency using your digital smartphone. The transaction will be instantaneous, and we intend to make sure that throughout the African continent, we have rolled out the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System. This is an example of how we are, as Africans, are facilitating trade, are facilitating business, and are eliminating what could potentially be very significant barriers to reaching new markets and to reaching new markets across the African continent. The second important tool is the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund. We know that there will be countries that will be immediate beneficiaries of the AfCFTA because these are countries that have the export capacity, the export base, the competitiveness. But there is also a significant number of countries who will suffer adjustment costs as they implement the AfCFTA. And so the board of Afreximbank approved an initial amount of $1 billion for this adjustment facility of the AfCFTA to enable countries who will need access to this fund to improve their competitiveness, to enable them to make use of the facility to implement the AfCFTA. Of course, for the moment, many countries on our continent rely on tariffs and duties as a revenue-generating tool. We should get to a point where tariffs, duties are actually a tool for Africa's industrial development, or regional industrial development, but of course we're not there yet. And until we get to that point, we have to introduce these tools to enable trade to happen under the AFCFTA, so that countries that today may not have the industrial capacity, may not have the export capacity, that they develop it over time with the assistance of this AFCFTA Adjustment Fund. Again, the primary beneficiaries has to be small, medium enterprises. Has the large corporations on our continent, for the most part, they can survive on their own. But where we should be making interventions that facilitate business, interventions that open trade in Africa, we should focus on small, medium enterprises. And I believe that the AFCFTA Adjustment Fund is one of the tools that is critical for that purpose. The other important tool, which again we have introduced, is the Africa Trade Gateway, a digital platform for small, medium enterprises, for large corporations, for entrepreneurs who want to have access to market information, due diligence, business connectivity of small, medium enterprises across regions. And of course, the Africa Trade Gateway digital platform will also have a payments component to it. So we've introduced all of these tools for the purpose which I believe is aligned to the theme, and that is we want to challenge trade protectionism, whether it's in the form of duties or non-tariff barriers. We want to make sure that we eliminate all of these barriers to business in Africa, particularly if we want to double intra-Africa trade by the year 2035, we have to intensify the implementation of these tools that I have just mentioned to enable cross-region trade to happen. Let me end by, there is a panel, and I know that all of us are looking forward to the panel. So let me conclude by saying the following. You will remember that in 2021, the World Bank released a report on the AFCFTA. And the report has very, very positive projections about trade in Africa enabled by the AFCFTA. They project that by the year 2035, where we implement the AFCFTA effectively, the impact on doing business in South Africa will be as follows. In Africa will be as follows. First, we will create trade opportunities for small, medium enterprises up to 450 billion United States dollars combined GDP by the year 2035. We will lift 100 million Africans out of extreme poverty and moderate poverty. We will contribute over 81% to intra-Africa trade. And the beneficiaries of all of this, the beneficiaries of all of these reduction and elimination of barriers to trade in Africa are projected to be small, medium enterprises. Not large corporations, not big governments, but the focus has to be, as the World Bank projected, has to be the small, medium enterprises and young entrepreneurs. So that is what we want the AFCFTA to focus on, to create opportunities for small, medium enterprises. The large corporations in Africa, they don't need the secretariat. They can access a new market immediately. It is the small, medium enterprises who require the support of the AFCFTA, of Afreximbank, of the African Development Bank, and other development finance institutions, so that we can see these very, very positive projections by the year 2035. We can see them in real time. I was really encouraged by the projection of the World Bank, particularly as it relates to small, medium enterprises. The other projection they make in the same study is that where we implement this agreement in a way that creates these business opportunities, at the same time we will be closing the gender salary gap. to enable women who are in the business of trade, who trade across borders, to also see the benefits of the AFCFTA. Very positive, encouraging projections, but they are not going to happen on their own. They certainly won't happen by chance. So all of us Africans, we will have to intensify our efforts to implement the AFCFTA so that we don't lose this once in a lifetime or once in a lifetime opportunity presented by the AFCFTA. When you look at the index for ease of doing business around the world, many African countries are, of course, at the lower end of the index. And that is because of these non-tariff barriers that exist, because of tariffs, of course, inefficiencies in our customs systems, lack of digitization of trade. All of these challenges are a barrier to doing business on the African continent. And so in the AFCFTA, for the first time, we have harmonized, for example, customs procedures, goods in transit, trade facilitation. All of these things are now harmonized. And each country that is a state party to the AFCFTA has a legal obligation to implement these measures that are aimed at efficiency of doing business in Africa, such as trade facilitation, goods in transit, and harmonization of our customs procedures. Again, it's going to be a very difficult challenge to get 43 countries to implement the single set of rules for trade and investment. However, we know the benefits. We know that there are benefits where we harmonize our customs procedures, for example. We know there are benefits for small, medium enterprises. We know there are benefits for large corporations. And so the ease of doing business, the cost of doing business must be addressed by the AFCFTA in the various protocols and the various instruments that are embedded in it. But I, of course, am not under any illusion that all of this will happen overnight. It's going to take a long time. It will require us to be disciplined in implementation of the AFCFTA. Yes, there will be challenges. Some countries will say, well, this fiscal year, we have a macroeconomic imbalance. We can't continue for this year with our tariff reduction commitments. It happens, it's normal. But in the long term, we have to think about where we want our continent to get to. I shared the other day an astounding percentage that 55 of us as Africans, 55 countries, we contribute to global trade and output 2.3%. We contribute to global GDP only 3%. All 55 of us combined. And when you think about the fact that Singapore's contribution to global trade is at about 6%. One country, an island, a city, contributing close to 6% to global trade, all 55 of us combined contributing less than 3% to global trade. That speaks to the challenge that we have. That speaks to the enormous task that we have to reduce barriers to intra-Africa trade, to enable efficiency of business, to enable our small, medium enterprises to thrive, so that we don't say, yes, we have a market of 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP of 3.4 trillion United States dollars. Because if we don't consolidate the market in accordance with the rules of the AFCFTA, we are not going to see the potential that we want to see. We will remain forever the continent of hope and potential, and never really achieving the objective that we all want to see, which is to reduce poverty in our continent, to industrialize our continent. I know President Adesina was here this morning to make sure that Africa through the business community, small medium enterprises, to make sure that Africa one day becomes as globally competitive as China, as India, as Singapore, or any other country. And I believe it's possible for us to achieve this objective of global competitiveness, provided we place the business community, the private sector, small medium enterprises, we place them at the center of benefits of this agreement. It was not negotiated for governments. Governments don't trade. Certainly people like me don't trade. It is the business community that trades across borders, and that's why the theme that you chose is absolutely appropriate as we confront the crises, the two crises I mentioned earlier, and as we seek to get our continent to be globally competitive in the next 3, 4, 5 decades to come. So once again, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you some of our objectives and ambitions for the business community as embedded in the rules of the AFCFTA. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for this very insightful and inspiring conversation. And really, the potential is there, but what I love is this is the time of actualization, not just potential. And therefore, without further ado, I would love to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Elombi, Dr. George Elombi, to come and speak to us a little bit more about the work of Afreximbank, which is the trade engine of the AFCTA. Dr. Elombi is an Executive Vice President of Corporate Governance and Legal Services at Afreximbank. He is a legal professional with a PhD in international arbitration, so very much also policy-oriented, but he is also the Executive Secretary. So he wears 2 hats at Afreximbank as well. And please, Dr. Elombi, without further ado, we'd love to hear more from you on this subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you, moderator. And thank you also, my brother Wamkele, for speaking so much about the AFCTA. The business of Afreximbank is all about making the AFCTA work, how to make it work, and how to get the trade working. You got the emphasis from all the speakers of this morning. It was about doing. So we have to reduce the talking and the planning. And in Afreximbank, we spend considerable time preparing to make the AFCTA work. The Secretariat itself, the support we provide there, the payment system he referred to, the fund, the AFCTA Adjustment Fund, to which we'll be asking many of you to join us and get that work. But since the focus is on how to do it, we thought we should first say thank you to the Rwandan authorities and to the Enterprise and Investment Fund of the Commonwealth, for making this occasion possible today. And perhaps to start the conversation, since it's a little conversation on some of the matters which Wamkele referred to, we did get a slide prepared early yesterday, saying that the topic was then moved to barriers. So perhaps the young men, it's your time now, the young men who are dealing, thank you. Now that slide, we're now talking about having things done within the Commonwealth. And the idea was that we try and get it focused so much, not on the political side, but on bringing change, transform change in the economics domain, in social change. And if you look at that slide and look at the trade flows between the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth and the outside world, what you find out is that as a whole, as you look at the trade, China is trading exceedingly much with India, a Commonwealth country. I'll give you some time to go through that a little carefully. But as you do, you would see that the Chinese trade with the Commonwealth is $887 billion. That's almost $900 billion. But Commonwealth trade itself, intra-Commonwealth trade, is just $1 trillion. So the Chinese trade with the Commonwealth is almost the same as intra-Commonwealth trade. Now, the combined trade of India and the United Kingdom with the Commonwealth, if you look very carefully, that will give you some figure of, if you look at lines 11 and 12, it will give you some figure of around 141 plus 92, 240-something billion of the trade of India. These are large economies in the Commonwealth. India and the UK with the Commonwealth is at least 3 times lower than Chinese trade with the Commonwealth. China's trade with the Commonwealth Africa, that's those African countries which are members of the Commonwealth, Chinese trade there is on line 6 from the top. If you look at that over the last 10 years, it has nearly doubled, so it's increasing from 48 billion 2021 to somewhere around 82 billion. It's in the increase. And that trade is higher than the combined trade of the UK, line 9, and Australia with Commonwealth Africa. Turkish trade. And if you see, even the Indian trade I referred to earlier has stabilized, but it hasn't increased much. Turkish trade with the Commonwealth, line 3 from the bottom, is low, but it has been increasing as you look at it. It's gone up from 2.3 to 3.78, nearly 4. So even though it's still low, it's in the increase. But while it's in the increase, the rest of the Commonwealth trade of the large Commonwealth countries within the Commonwealth and with African countries of the Commonwealth is in the decrease. So there is a story there. Is that we would like to see the Commonwealth become an agent for change. Change from politics to the economics. It's important that we focus on the economics so that we can transform the Commonwealth and its perception of itself. To do this, we think they need to trade more with countries of the Commonwealth in Africa so that we can make Wamkele's promise of a successful AfCFTA work. We also think that his adjustment fund, some investment needs to be made into the adjustment fund. The PAPS, the payment system, Afreximbank has already set that up and it's working in a pilot zone. The 6 West African countries which have 6 different currencies. And the idea is that if it works there, and it seems to be working, then it can be extended. And for that, Afreximbank has committed $500 million for the 6 countries, and as it expands, $3 billion. All of that is available. There is need to act, and act is what we really think is going to transform the conversation to reality. We also looked at questions of investment, the flows. That the question of acting is just about boldness. The Chinese, the Turks are doing it in Africa. They're also doing it within the Commonwealth, but the barriers are the same. So it's probably not a question of barriers, it's a question of boldness. We have to take that boldness, take the initiative, do it. Some money will be lost, but we know from Afreximbank's own experience dealing with the vaccines for Africa, $2 billion, dealing with the Ukraine crisis, $4 billion, dealing with the counter-cyclical crisis a little earlier, $12 billion. We know with all of that, and we know with over $22 billion of loans in Africa that perhaps not up to 4% of it would be lost. And take the risk, be bold like the Turks, be bold like the Chinese, and there would be change. And as we speak, we do invite the Commonwealth, investors, businessmen to join us in a battery unit we're trying to set up in a Commonwealth country, Zambia. And the idea is that there is a call for environment change. We're not too wedded to that as yet because we still think the continent needs fossil fuels to get to somewhere. But there are minerals used for electric batteries, and those are abundant in Zambia. And we've already joined an arrangement with Zambia and DRC to get that working. We think it will work, and it needs to be expanded. And we have put the money in it. So our invitation to you is that you begin to do that. It will create jobs. It will address the question of environment you referred to. It will also address the question of low levels of Commonwealth trade. And these figures I showed earlier were for the trade only. You have to also look at the figures for investment flows, not the trade, not the exports and the imports, the investment flows, the FDIs. Those within the Commonwealth remain significantly low. So we thought we should draw your attention to that as you have the discussions today and tomorrow, so that we begin to focus more on the doing. Thank you very much, President, so that we can give some time for your panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ilombe. And the key takeaway here, I think, complements wonderfully. Thank you, sir. We have the tools, now we need the boldness. So without further ado, I would love to call on our next, our chair, our moderator. For those of you who were here this morning, you heard me refer to her as a personal icon. So I have been a little starstruck, but speaking of boldness, our moderator and chair who will go ahead and introduce our esteemed panelists. You're in for a treat. We really have wonderful people on this panel. Is Julie Gichuru, who is the Chief Public Affairs and Communications Officer at the MasterCard Foundation. She oversees corporate, programmatic policy and thought leadership. Julie is very humble, but if you will allow me to give a little bit of background on you. Just a quick one, just very quickly. Julie has been nominated or has been named as one of the 100 most influential African women in 2019. And New African, thank you. New African magazine listed her as one of the most influential Africans as well. So Julie, I just had to say this because speaking of boldness, you are bold. Thank you. So without further ado, Julie, take on the floor and enjoy the rest of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olivia. Utterly humbled. Thank you so, so much. And thank you for such a great start to our afternoon. So I want to welcome our panelists to come up and take their seats. And Faustin Mbundu, let me welcome you to come right next to me. Chairman, MTN Rwanda Cell. Annette Semuemba, Deputy Executive Director of EIF at WTO, Uganda. A warm welcome. And EIF refers to the Enhanced Integrated Framework. Thank you, please have a seat. Also very happy to have with us Deodat Maharaj, CEO at the Caribbean Export Development Agency, Trinidad and Tobago. A warm welcome. Also with us, Gabi Asare Ochere Darko, Partner, Africa Legal Partners in Ghana. A warm welcome. And we have Marco Forgione, Director General, Institute of Export and International Trade in the United Kingdom. A warm welcome, Marco. And finally, we have Dr. Emogen Nsengimana, Secretary General of the African Organization for Standardization here in Rwanda. So this is an incredible panel. I will try to come to the floor with a couple of questions. Our time is very tight, so we'll dive straight into it. When we talk about challenging trade protectionism and reducing barriers, and we've heard from our earlier speakers, some incredible things are happening. There is movement. But I wonder from where you sit in the work that you do and what you see, what things do we need to keep in mind to really be able to leverage the Commonwealth and regional economic bodies as well to transform the situation, get rid of those barriers? So let's start there. And I think, Gabby, I'd like to begin with you. What things are top of mind for you?
Well, thank you. I think it was in 2019, October 2019, the trade ministers of the Commonwealth met, and key to the discussions was that we need to fight protectionism. And I think the question, and also we need to reform the WTO to make it more relevant. But then the question you and I have to ask ourselves is that, what has happened since then, over the last couple of years? It's also interesting that for the Commonwealth itself, I think they've just had 6 trade ministers meeting over the 70 years or so. So it tells you, as an earlier speaker said, that the Commonwealth itself has to begin making itself more relevant where the trade conversation is. And as we've heard earlier, if you look at it, there are 19 African countries within the Commonwealth. They make up, I believe, some 48% or 48% or so in terms of the GDP of the continent, over 42%, but a little over under 50%, as compared to 29 La Francophonie countries that make up less than 50% of the GDP of the continent. So if you look at it, in terms of where the African continent is going, and the Commonwealth seeking to be relevant in that conversation, and having 19 African countries within the Commonwealth, I think if the Commonwealth begin to discuss how it can make itself relevant in terms of the global trade conversation, it has within the African continent partners and members who can help push it. Because in terms of what we heard earlier, the intra-African trade is expected to double by 2035. Now, if that's going to happen, you know that you'll be driven more or less by the Commonwealth countries within the continent. So what will be the contribution of the Commonwealth countries outside of the continent to this development? I think those are some of the things that we want to see happen. Yeah.
Thank you, Gabby. And I think, pulls on the point that was made by Dr. George Elombi, where he said, there's a need to transform the Commonwealth and its perception of itself, and we've got to see a move from politics to economics. And in that move, they've got to understand what is important, relevant for members. Okay, let me come now to you, Deodat, and your thoughts on what needs to shift, what's critical, what do you see from where you sit?
Yeah, well, I think that listening to Kelly and listening to George, I think we have a framework, that's one. But secondly, the world has changed, and so must we. So take, for example, I'm from the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago. And we have had a traditional trading relationship with Europe, looking to the north, for example. But we have inextricable and deep people-to-people, cultural and historical ties with Africa. It's really time for us to stop talking, right? And start acting and translating that relationship and using the Commonwealth as a framework into jobs and opportunity for our people. And I like what Gabby has said as well. And how do we act? That's the next question. So like we at the Caribbean Export Development Agency, we put businesses from country A together with businesses from country B. So we have to move to the next stage, bringing the business people together, having the projects, let them take the conversation forward. And I like very much what the SG said as well about micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises. Because in the Caribbean, 70% of employment is generated by micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises. Over 60% of our region's GDP is generated by micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises. So it's about bringing the businesses together in this new world order, leveraging the Commonwealth to deepen Africa-Caribbean relationship, Africa-Pacific relationship, Caribbean-Asia relationship, for example.
Wow. Are you excited? I'm excited at this idea of this new world order, reframing how we think. And you referred to the role of MSMEs. And can we just recognize for a moment our informal sector? These small businesses mean so much to our economies and are not often given, the support or recognition that they need. So Annette, let me come to you. What do you see from your vantage point?
Thank you very much, and very interesting conversation so far. First, from Gabi, he mentioned the number of countries in Africa that are within the Commonwealth, and majority of them are least developed. It means they contribute very little to global trade. It's almost negligible. And we've heard also over the morning, since the morning, that we need to act. We need to take action. We need to have solutions. And I still, I think, need to hear what those solutions are, because we all recognize the importance of including women, including the youth, including small businesses, but how? I think the how, for me, is still missing. I also don't have the solutions, but I do have some ideas. For instance, if the facilities that SG talked about were all available, information about these facilities was available in a language that everybody understands, that was accessible, if there was an app that the youth could visit and be able to find out what the information is and what's required. And I also hope that access is simplified, that if a woman entrepreneur goes into one of the offices that manages these facilities and wants to get access, the requirements are not too many that they chase them away. So those are some of the challenges that are real. Businesses want to get involved, they don't know how. When they know how, it's very, very difficult. And sometimes I feel that they are left on their own. But I know that with public-private partnerships, with the role of the business membership organizations, because they have a critical role to play. I can't imagine that SG Mene and his institution are going to go and look for each and every business entrepreneur. Let us support these business membership organizations, the cooperatives that bring people together. Let's expose them, like we've just heard now, bring them together with others in another region. Let them speak to each other and learn. There's a lot to learn from different countries within the Commonwealth, and let's leverage these opportunities.
Thank you, very, very powerful. And you bring us right to Faustin. I think, thank you. What does the role of private sector, but maybe more than that, role of telcos, we know the transformation we've seen on the continent already because of the power of innovation and connectivity, etc. What is your role? How do you see it? What's your view?
Thank you. Let me start by saying that the role of telcos in this discussion is very important. When you think about the industrial revolution where we are in, which is driven by digital systems, it is a time that we could use that to leverage everything and be able to solve the challenges that we have. When you think about it, you look at the Commonwealth in general, you have extremes on either side, but in those extremes is where there are opportunities. You have high-income countries that have so much capital that does not have a good return. You have low-income countries that have young population, low incomes, but a lot of potential. And you have systems that are failing us because of lack of monitoring, lack of evaluation, and lack of seamless flow of transactions. And in that role, that's when digital capability comes in, the digital ecosystems that we need to build to be able to drive investment, to drive trade, to drive transactions. And in that, I see it as, when you look at investors who are investing into the telco industry, they need to be assured that the policies and regulatory processes in those countries where they're investing are clear and simple and give results that give their investment meaning. So where I'm sitting here talking about how the telcos help, you can see how they've changed access to finance with their mobile money transactions that MTN has been proud to champion. And when you look at the connectivity, where they come in and are having solutions where they are giving digital devices to make it possible for the unconnected to come back to the party. It's very important that we have these players coming in, and as players in the digital field, we are happy to be playing our part, but I think it goes beyond that. We cannot do it when you don't have policies, when you don't have a regulatory framework that's predictable, that's friendly, and that is easy to deal with them. Policies, we need policies in place, but I think we are doing our part. And beyond that, even more people need to take advantage of this digital revolution to be able to drive trade and investment.
Thank you, Faustin. Marco, let me come to you next. From your lens, what are the key things that we need to confront, and what are the shifts you would like to see?
Brilliant. Thank you. I'd like to start by contextualizing my comments in congratulating His Excellency Wamkele Mene and Dr. George Ilombi for enunciating so clearly the potential and the opportunity which exists for free trade and the transformation that will make across communities. And I'm aware many people here probably don't know about the Institute of Export and International Trade. We are a charity which is focused on building capacity, sharing knowledge and expertise to encourage more businesses, more organizations to undertake international trade. And we do that because all the research shows that businesses which trade internationally are more profitable, more sustainable, more innovative, and employ more people. And that is the big win that exists, not just for the Commonwealth, but across Africa. And in Nigeria, you have a tech hub which is transforming the view of global technology. And the transformation in international trade will be built on the back of technological innovation. There is a project which is being delivered, and we are partnering with Trademark East Africa on a similar project to link Kenya with the DRC. The time for transportation between the dock in Kenya and the DRC has been reduced through technology from 3 weeks to 3 days. And what that means is that the product that is being transported is cheaper, the cost of transportation is reduced, the risk is reduced, so the cost of finance is reduced, the cost of insurance is reduced, you get greater transparency, and you get a swifter flow of product. So the biggest challenge is to integrate technology across the entire supply chain, and Africa stands at a cross point where you can be the global leaders in innovation in what that means. And just to give you an example, in the UK, we are only now undertaking to transform our trade documentation. You still rely, in the UK, if you are moving goods, on a paper document that has its roots back in the 1600s. And so we are only starting that process. Africa, you have the potential to lead the way, and the Commonwealth, because of our shared heritage, because of our shared systems, you can be the real spark that ignites that digital transformation. And the only additional point is about knowledge and understanding, because you can have all the agreements you like, you can have all the free trade agreements you wish, but if the businesses don't know how to turn that free trade agreement into actual business, then, to be honest, it's not worth the paper it's written on. So you need to educate and inform the traders and then set them free.
Oh, powerful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Emojina, I come straight to you now. Your perspective.
I think When you look at the trade and protectionism, there is a soft infrastructure that we don't look at, is the standard. Standards, because if you look at even the discussion we had this morning on growing agriculture on the continent, or our natural resources, talk about gold, copper, and so on, we still trade in commodity. And by even trading in commodity, the rejections, if you ask the SMEs, the rejections that we have when you are trading are related to non-compliance to standards. In agriculture sector, it's around 60% of rejection. And that is just commodity. Think about now going toward industrialization. Going toward industrialization, you need to transform those commodities to the higher in the value chain. It's to talk to each other. What you are transforming, we are in automobile industry. Our head of state has this in mind, to grow in automobile industry. We should be thinking, if we are transforming cobalt, how can I reach a level to develop a chip that I can sell to Japan and enter the car industry? That is interoperability. That cannot exist if you don't conform to standards. We have what we call a 1-1-1 principle. In the Commonwealth family, we should be having one standard, one test, one certificate. Then that product can move from one country to another without retesting. That is an extra cost. I think that if we address that issue on standard, we can move forward. And the other part is to understand which commodity you have been trading. Dr. Lombi was showing what we are trading. But if you ask an SME sitting here, that did you decide to trade on coffee or tea? You will say, no, it's probably my government or my partner in Europe or who said so. Let's think about when we want to leverage on AFCFTA, we need to have comparative advantage, mainly on the countries that His Excellency President Kagame was talking this morning, the small countries. Let's share the wealth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very clear. Thank you so much. And when we talk about standards and say, you know, we have huge gaps there, we're just not meeting the standards. We've got to go back and ask why and start to fix, right? And we'll come back to that. I do want to pose that to you. Deodat and then Annette, I know you wanted to come in, so go ahead, please. One moment, can we just make sure the mic is on? Try now.
Yeah, I like what my friend said, we need to share the wealth. I think what I ought to have said at the very beginning, the first barrier to trade that we have across the Commonwealth is mental, right? So we have to get over that mental barrier and look at those new relationships I spoke to. The second point I really wanted to emphasize is that 31 out of the 54 members of the Commonwealth are small countries. And I love this slide that our friend George put up in his presentation, because when you look at the numbers that are declining, the percentage of small states, I mean, they're declining more than anybody else. And my concern is that the small states in Africa, the small states in the Pacific, and the small states in the Caribbean are being marginalized and eclipsed. And if the Commonwealth is about commonwealth and common shared values, it's also about a common family. And no family, right, should be one where there are the haves and the have-nots. But what do we need to do? One, put businesses from the Caribbean in touch with businesses from Africa and other places. Secondly, to focus on the sectors that can drive transformation, technology and agriculture, innovation and technology. And critically important for us in the Caribbean is to learn from Africa as well with the efforts you are making in green economy transition. So to advance a transformational agenda and make the common relevant, it's about the big ideas, but it's about the practical, concrete, day-to-day things that we need to do, including with the MSMEs, to make things happen, to create jobs and opportunity.
Right, you're talking about capacity building, building strong institutions on the ground, ensuring that education is working, relevant, connected to realities. And maybe we'll come back to more on that. Annette, please.
I had something really interesting on the 111. And over the lunchtime, I had a chat with a lady from Nigeria who's here to display some of her facial products. And she said in the US, she has a license to export to the US, and she needs just one certificate from the Food and Drug Administration, whatever issues those certificates. And it's valid for 5 years. And here in Africa, she needs a multiple, maybe 20 or so different licenses from different institutions for this same one product. Let's harmonize and get the institutions to work together towards one license, as we just had, to enable business to be able to move quickly. And the issue also, and I think he read from my notes, because I was thinking, again, a point that I picked from that conversation I had over lunch. She said that if we started to look at these products as, if we got a bit of value from these products ourselves, if we treated them with a bit more respect as officials that help with the clearance processes, maybe we'll do things differently. Because she talked about containers that stay in the sun because a customs official meant to inspect them is finishing her lunch and doesn't want to interrupt her lunch to be able to do her job. By the time the goods get shipped, they are rejected because they stayed in the sun. It's not because they weren't of the right standard, it's because during the transportation process, logistics, something went wrong. Let's try and also be more compassionate, if that's the word, or try to think about people that are trying to make a difference and provide that support that they need.
Thank you for that. Marco, please go ahead.
That is such an important point. 40% of all agricultural product goes to waste before it gets to market. There is a tremendous initiative taking place in Kigali, ACES, which is a cold store facility. It's about cold store excellence. The idea being that if you can extend access to cold store through the entire of the logistics system and processes across Africa, you make a massive impact, saving potentially 40% of waste. As an example of the importance of this, for every hour that a strawberry stays at the temperature it was picked, it loses 5 days of shelf life. So investing in cold store is going to be essential. I'm delighted that Rwanda is investing in supporting a sustainable green tech cold store system, which will really begin to make a massive impact on trade intra-Africa and outside of Africa as well.
Okay, super fast, please.
Just building on that point, what I wanted to say was that the point they talked about simplify, harmonize, and modernize the policies. I think once you have those three, you make it simple, it's harmonized so that different states, different jurisdictions share the same way they look at things, but also modernize. By modernizing, you are digitizing. When you digitize, you hold people responsible. When Marco was talking about the cold chain, when you digitize the cold chain, the people who are responsible for something that's gone wrong along the chain are easy to identify. So, and when they're identified, you don't shift blame. So if we continue to, it brings back the point you talked about earlier of digitizing, of the digital environment we are creating that will make us more efficient. So when you, we cannot talk so much, we can never talk enough about digitizing our systems, because without them, there is no way we'll hold people accountable. And for things that are not going well in the Commonwealth, yet with the clear policies, we're just talking, I think, earlier about how our regions are more open to trade, yet and other regions are more protectionist, yet we don't see the results that we should be seeing from the way we look at things and the way we promote them. And I think what's lacking is holding those accountable that don't do what they've set out to do or what they've promised to do. So we need to digitize. We need to have systems that can be clear and can make processes easier and can actually apportion blame. So that, and actually also need to empower those young people that are yearning for jobs, that are saying, you think about us, but we don't see it. If they don't have digital devices that bring them to the forum where they can air their grievances and actually give us ideas, that's when the MTNs come in. What are the regulators and governments doing? And for us, we also do our part for connectivity.
Right, thank you, thank you. Gabby, please.
I think in order for Africa to gain leverage in global trade or even trade within the continent, I think we need to, governments across Africa need to take industrialization seriously. Because really, even without us industrializing as much as we should, about 62% or so of intra-African trade is in manufactured goods. So it tells you the potential if we do more. And I will use Ghana as an example. Over the last 5 years, the government set up a policy called One District, One Factory. Essentially what it means is that they identify the area that the district may have a sort of advantage, whether in terms of they grow more tomatoes or timber, whatever it is, and then they build or they help fund to build a factory there, okay? And what that is doing is that it is allowing districts across the country, particularly those within, a lot of them are agro-based, to add processing. So they then are embedded in the supply chain. And once you do that, you create more jobs and the rest of it. So I think that we can, yes, we can talk about intra-African trade, we can talk about AFCFTA, we always struggle to pronounce it. AAC. Yes. Say after, it's easier. Okay? We want to do all that, but if we don't take a strategic policy decision across the continent to industrialize, we will struggle. Because really, even if agric is the area that we have advantage, we need to add more to the value that we are getting. And then when you look at, if you take it further across the Commonwealth, there are about 20 trade blocks within the Commonwealth. In terms of, I mean, Africa alone, there are 8 of them. And then you look at the Pacific, you look at the Caribbean alone, you have about 3 or 4. You know. So there are all these trade blocks. Now you ask yourself, if we're going to make the Commonwealth relevant to the Commonwealth countries, how are we positioning the Commonwealth? And I think that strategically, I find the Commonwealth a bit lacking in relevance in terms of where it positions itself with this whole globalization train. Because what it is that you don't see where it is. Of course, the business forum is important in getting businesses within the Commonwealth to talk among ourselves, which we are not seeing so much within Africa. The AFTA and the whole free trade thing is being driven by the politicians, but we are not seeing a lot of that. So I believe even in Ghana, in October, the AFCFTA and the Ghana government and an association called Africa Prosperity Network, they actually bring in businesses across the continent together with the political leaders so that the conversation about free trade is not driven by the politicians alone, but also about business. And of course, women and young people as well. I was happy to hear that in terms of gender salary, we are looking for parity. I am looking forward to that because my wife earns more money than I do. Anyway, that's it.
Thank you. And very interesting you say that. Let me just give you some stats that were shared by my team on young people. Awareness among young Africans on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is low, 20%. But there's appetite for economic cooperation, so there's some potential there. I think something that we really need to do is rally the continent and really help build ownership of this agenda, help them understand what it is, and then plug in, help them plug in. I'm coming to you now, and then I will come to the floor. Over to you, sir.
I would like to come in on industrialization, maybe a little bit on helping the gender balance. In February, our head of state endorsed a document developed on Made in Africa guideline. The Made in Africa guideline is a standard to guide our industry, how we can move from lower quality level product to higher quality level. It has 3 components: is equality on standards, intellectual property, and rules of origin. Let me just start with intellectual property. When we were discussing issues, vaccines are not there, we talked about patents. Patents, if you look at the standard on other areas, they are a document that has science. In those standards, there is a free science knowledge that other people are using without the expensive patents that we normally go through. Are you utilizing that opportunity? Giving you an example, we need to have priorities, priority voucher. We are saying that there is a fashion week during this Commonwealth event. Can we say we have African size? When you go to market, you will say, oh, is 10 UK, 10 Chinese, 10 US, if you want a shoe, or 20 European. Do you have an African size? We don't. And that we cannot move in economy of scale if we need to move with the fashion industry, if we don't have a standard on just body sizes. Because we will know that the tailor sitting at home is probably making shoes for 100 million on the African continent. But when he's making shoes, he's probably making for the Chinese size, which is not African size, or other sizes. That's really where we need to focus. We can invest, we can do anything, but if we don't have that soft knowledge, we will not industrialize. Thank you.
What an outstanding point. Thank you so much. I'm coming to the floor. I think there's a roving mic. I just want to take 2-3 comments. I don't want to take questions. I want you to tell us your thoughts on how we really remove these, barriers, how we address protectionism, or some of the things we should be thinking about as we move forward. So just three maybe comments. I see one hand over there. I see one, I think it's a lady on this end. Who has the mic? Is there a mic? Oh, and there's, yes, I see, sir. Thank you. There's the gentleman there, and then do we have another mic? Are we working with one?
Yeah.
In the gray jacket. Please stand up, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Gatete Colin. I'm from Rwanda. I would like to ask my question to Dr. Hermogene.
Oh, Gatete, I had said no questions. But yeah, just comments and contributions from your lens. What must we do? Maybe reframe.
Actually, that is my question would have brought out the answer that I think I would have loved Dr. Hermogene to respond to, but from the institution where he's working, where he sits as an African institute, for harmonizing standards
yes.
Across the region.
Yes.
I think they have. They are the focal point of this harmonization of these standards, and I think it's all about government giving away that small power to an African standard body to allow the standard to be unified by a body such as ARASO, where Mr. Hermogene sits. Okay. So that's my comment on that. Maybe I don't know the challenges they're facing, but that would be my comment to that. Thank you.
Thank you for that contribution.
Thank you very much.
Yes, on this side, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Looking at the trade from a supply chain perspective.
Please introduce yourself, sir.
My name is Patrick Dikumana. I'm based here, work with Development Startup Lab. My comment goes to looking at trade from a supply chain perspective. I think there's three main flows if we look at it. The payment flows, the information flow, but also the physical flow of goods that people are producing on the ground. And I believe that we're not having enough conversation on that end, because the physical flow is one of the highest drive of costs if you look at the business side. And there's a lot of projects, stuff that have been done 100 years ago about that. But we're not seeing it here now. Yet we have more technology, more financing. I don't understand why we are not talking about that. And if we look at the numbers and the statistics, we saw Commonwealth, taking the example of China and Commonwealth in general, we saw 882, I believe, billions. Yet if we look at Africa, China and Africa, it's less than 10% of that. It means there's another side of Commonwealth that has done, and looking at the correlation, there's a correlation on things, infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and I believe we should be talking about an update on some of the project that has been done or anything that is going to be done.
Excellent.
Railways, tangible things that needs to be done to make that flow less costly for the businesses.
Thank you. Very, very good point. I'll take one final one there. If it's short, I can take one last one. Let's see.
Thank you very much. My name is June Francis. I grew up in Jamaica, so part of my identity and question will come from being in the Caribbean. The other side of me is that I live in Canada, and I'm the director of the Institute for Diaspora, Black and African Diaspora engagement. So I have two comments, and I'll be as quick as I can. One has to follow up on this question of intellectual property. We know historically intellectual property rights have been designed with a very European base, with very, very industrialized countries taking the full advantage of most brand names, intellectual property rights, derived to developed countries, as we used to say, you know, the European American countries. Here's my comment. Africa has two sets of intellectual property. One is traditional knowledge. No matter where you go across this continent, in terms of the flora and fauna, in terms of the biodiversity, and in terms of the historical millennial know-how, there is a tremendous amount of historical knowledge about how plants work, how we do various things. And yet the intellectual property regime have not, you know, there have been some developments, but they have not kept pace to protect this intellectual property from being usurped. So if you take something like the dress I'm wearing, the designs of fabrics, etc., we know the fights about that. But these are designs that have emerged out of Africa. So you think about geographical indication, all of the ways in which we have specialty products. Are they protected? France owns most of those, right? So you cannot make, you know, grow certain grapes anywhere else in the world. These are the basis for getting additional, you know, revenues and intellectual property. So I think that should be a major focus as we standardize. The other thing is, and I'll be quick here, is that I'm from the Caribbean, so I'll just say we need to connect the fact that because of our historical colonial past, many countries in the Commonwealth were based on the same sort of industrial base, meaning no industry. So as we go forward, we can't all be doing the same things. So we need to develop strategies that creates that kind of trade, because if we're all doing the same things, that will not generate trade between each other.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all who've spoken. I'm so sorry. I've literally got to wind up, and so I'm going to just come straight back to the panel, because I do want to bring one final question to you all. Just do it. We just need to get it done. This is about implementation. I mean, I know there are challenges that in some places we do have the policies, but it doesn't reflect, you know, the activity on the ground. We've heard some of the great questions raised and issues raised from the floor as well. I want to come to each of you for a 20-second, literally, comment on when we say just do it. What's that one thing you think needs to be done, and who needs to do it? I will begin with you, Faustin.
20 seconds?
20, okay, 30 at most.
Okay, I think what we need to do to have it, to unblock whatever is blocking everything is, I think let's have more people come to the floor. Meaning where we have the investment, where we have the money, let's find a way to bring the money into Africa and let the people who've brought their capital also be part of finding solutions, because they need a return on their investment. And let's use institutions like Afrexim Bank, AFDB, to actually influence the money flow to where we are, and be a catalyst in trying to encourage them to come. Then finally, let's digitize. And this digital revolution we're in, if we are not careful, we'll have another revolution come and find us lagging behind when we haven't taken advantage. Yet the tools for us to take advantage are within our grasp.
Thank you.
And we can do that by having these countries, regional blocks, AFC, or Africa as a whole, working together to create strategies, policies to digitize our economies, our transactions.
Thank you. Thank you. Very well done, Annette. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we've heard, it's a new world, and it can't be business as usual. We need to find new ways of, you know, action. Even meetings such as these perhaps also we need to be more creative about the approaches that we are taking, and we've heard that technology and using digital ways of working is one way for that. But broadly, engagement, public-private collaboration, very, very important. Implementation in a timely way. I mean, if a policy is implemented 10 years later, it's not going to deliver the same benefits as would have been intended at the time that it was developed. So let's think about time. Let's think about the world more broadly. Let's see what contribution we can bring, and we all have a contribution we can bring. Let's not give responsibility to a few and sit back. I think there's a role that each and every one of us can play, the women, the youth. Let's all come together to the table. The solutions are there. And by the way, whatever we're trying to do, it has been done. There's nothing new that we're trying to do.
There's nothing new, and we all have a role to play. We can do it. Thank you. Deodat, please. One moment.
Yeah, I think since it's a Commonwealth Forum, I should underline that the Commonwealth can play an important role in helping business people meet other business people in the sectors that could drive transformation to create jobs and opportunity for our people. Agtech or technology in agriculture, green economy transition, e-commerce, digitalization, and technology. This is precisely what we are doing in the Caribbean, and in a very concrete and practical way. So we'd also like to invite everyone here to come to Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago in November of this year. I must do a little PR as well. In November of this year, where we're going to bring 450 to 500 business people from out of the Caribbean to meet business people in the Caribbean to talk about business, jobs, and opportunity.
Okay, great. So we have a date in Ghana in October. We have a date in Trinidad and Tobago in November, did you say? Great. Excellent. Gabby?
For me, if you look at globally, what are the issues? Wheat, the price of wheat has gone up. Supply chains, we have issues there. Oil and gas, fertilizer, iron ore. Now, when you look at all these commodities, 48% of production of iron ore in the world is from the Commonwealth countries. Just two, India and Australia, okay? When you look at fertilizer, at least 11% from the Commonwealth countries. Nigeria is currently the highest growing producer of fertilizer. We can do more. When you look at oil and gas, 15% of global production come from Commonwealth countries, including Trinidad and Tobago, Mozambique, and the rest of it. So there's a lot within the Commonwealth that if they begin thinking strategically and working together, because here in Africa, whether they like it or not, the single market is on.
It's on.
And it's happening. Okay? So then for the Commonwealth partners outside of Africa, how did they come in? Because they can help us in terms of intermediary support, because they have equipment, particularly in the UK. They have other things that they can contribute to help us build the single market, because we are building it with or without them. AfriExim and the rest of them are helping. You know, so really, the Commonwealth countries should see how they can be relevant in helping to build the biggest trade bloc in the world. It is happening, and it ain't stopping, and they must play a more meaningful role. That's my conclusion.
Thank you, Gabby. Thank you. Marco?
Thank you. The excellent panel, the presentations earlier, I think, have shown that there are significant challenges, that it won't be easy, but it will be worthwhile. I was last week at the WTO for the MC12. We went into that meeting expecting the whole thing to potentially fall apart. Through the sheer force of commitment and dedication, the energy and enthusiasm of Dr. Ngozi, they got the deal done.
Wow.
So my message to this group, to the Commonwealth, to Africa, is simple. Dream, believe, do.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
For a meaningful Commonwealth, I think we need also a meaningful mutual recognition agreements between countries to realize that's one standard, one test, one certificate, one standard, one market for Commonwealth. Thank you.
Wow, okay. Short, sharp, very, very clear. I want to really thank this panel. And just as I close, I want to let you know what we're doing at the MasterCard Foundation, how we see this. And we really see education and financial inclusion as absolutely critical to help push this agenda along. Just to let you all know, under the Scholars Program to date, we are hitting close to 40,000 scholarships for young Africans over the past 10 years. This is the 10-year anniversary. 40,000, if you think of all those lives and what it will do for the continent. And we've committed another 50,000 as well. I think for us, it's really, really clear that once you enable communities with education, once you allow for financial inclusion, you start to shift things. But we're sitting, we're listening, and we're trying to learn what else. And I hope that we all are listening to each other and willing to walk on the journey together. It's been an absolute pleasure. A big round of applause for the panel, please. And let me hand over to our wonderful host, Olivia. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to everyone here. Again, please, big round of applause. I think it's not every day that you get to have this caliber of insight and passion, so I think we're in really good hands. Now, unfortunately, as all good things, we are running a little bit out of time, so we would like to request the next session is going to occur immediately. So the panel on sustainable finance, do we have our panelists here yet? I think they're in the back room, but for sustainable finance, please, I invite you to remain seated, and that way we don't lose out too much on time. I see our panelists already. I will pass over to my colleague, another wonderful, wonderful MC and moderator. I see you there. Hi. This is Fiona. Please give a big round of applause for Fiona Mbabazi, looking fantastic, and our esteemed panelists. And once again, thank you for joining us on the session of Global Trade. We look forward to catalyzing more solutions, and I think the message is very clear. Let's do, do, do. So without further ado, have a great afternoon. Over to you, Fiona.
Thank you so much, Olive. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I do understand that this is the last session for the day, but I'd like all of us to engage and make it a fun conversation. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, in this session, we will be focusing on the business of sustainable fashion. This is a very crucial conversation because the fashion and textile industries is one of the 5 big bets for the circular economy. So shortly, we'll just be getting into how fashion can really be sustainable, because looking at statistics, the textile industry is valued at about $3 trillion US, and it is projected to grow by 60% by 2030. Guys, that in 8 years, it is expected to grow by 60%. So we'll have a conversation on how